Max Holloway just sent the most brutal message possible to Dustin Poirier and the entire UFC lightweight division, and what he revealed about this trilogy fight will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about this matchup. While everyone's painting this as some beautiful retirement story for Poirier in his home state of Louisiana, Holloway dropped a bombshell that changes everything. The Hawaiian warrior isn't just planning to show up and play nice for Dustin's farewell tour. He's coming to completely destroy the narrative and steal the spotlight in the most savage way possible. When asked about the trilogy, Holloway didn't hold back. He's here to spoil Poirier's plans and get his hand raised while Dustin rides off into the sunset. But the story behind how this fight even got made reveals something that nobody saw coming. Here's what's really wild about this whole situation. Dustin Poirier never actually wanted Max Holloway for his retirement fight. Reports surfaced that when Poirier was planning his final walk to the octagon, he was specifically asking the UFC for either Justin Gaethje or Ilia Topuria. Think about that for a second. The guy who's 2-0 against Holloway didn't want to complete the trilogy. Instead, he wanted fresh blood, bigger names, more explosive opponents for his grand finale. But the UFC had other plans. And now Poirier's stuck with the one fighter who might just ruin his perfect ending. This revelation completely changes the dynamic of everything we thought we knew about this matchup. Poirier isn't walking into this as the confident veteran looking to cap off his career with a third victory over the same opponent. He's been forced into a situation he didn't necessarily want, facing a desperate and dangerous Max Holloway, who's coming off the most devastating loss of his entire career. And that loss? It created a monster that nobody in the lightweight division is prepared for. Everything changed for Max Holloway at UFC 308 when Ilia Topuria did something that no fighter had ever accomplished in over a decade of Holloway's career. Topuria knocked him out cold, marking the very first time in Holloway's legendary run that anyone had put him to sleep. The sight of Blessed crumpled on the canvas sent shockwaves through the MMA world. But instead of breaking Holloway's spirit, that knockout seemed to ignite something even more dangerous. Within months of that loss, Holloway made a permanent move to lightweight, abandoning the featherweight division where he'd been king. The man who once ruled 145 pounds was now hunting for redemption at 155, and he wasn't playing around. This wasn't a gradual transition or a test run. This was a complete reinvention of one of the sport's most beloved fighters, and Poirier just became his first target in this new chapter. But here's where things get absolutely insane. Before that devastating loss to Topuria, Holloway had delivered what many consider the greatest moment in UFC history at UFC 300. With Justin Gaethje holding the BMF title and the fight seemingly heading to a decision in Holloway's favor, something magical happened in those final seconds. Instead of coasting to victory, Holloway looked at Gaethje and pointed to the center of the octagon, essentially saying, "Let's throw down right here, right now." What happened next will be talked about forever. With literally 1 second left on the clock, Holloway landed a perfectly timed right hand that sent Gaethje crashing to the canvas, unconscious before his body hit the mat. The timing was so perfect it seemed scripted. The knockout happened at 4:59 of the fifth round, with just one tick remaining. Holloway had no business taking that risk when he was already winning, but he chose violence anyway, and the MMA gods rewarded him with arguably the most iconic finish in the sport's history. That moment revealed something crucial about Holloway's mindset heading into this Poirier trilogy. This isn't a fighter who plays it safe or settles for easy victories. This is someone who will risk everything for the perfect moment, and that mentality makes him incredibly dangerous for someone like Poirier, who's trying to control his retirement narrative. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room that nobody wants to address. This trilogy sits at 2-0 in favor of Dustin Poirier, but those victories tell a story that might not repeat itself on July 19th. Their first meeting happened over 13 years ago when Holloway was just 20 years old, making his UFC debut against a more experienced Poirier, who submitted him with a triangle armbar in the first round. That version of Holloway barely resembles the fighter who would go on to become one of the greatest featherweights of all time. Their second encounter came 7 years later with the interim lightweight title on the line. By then, Holloway was the reigning featherweight champion, fresh off title defenses against legends. But Poirier had evolved too, and after 5 grueling rounds, he emerged victorious to earn his shot at Khabib Nurmagomedov. Here's what's fascinating, though. That fight took place when Holloway was still primarily a featherweight, moving up in weight. Now he's a full-time lightweight with a completely different approach to the division. The fighter Poirier will face on July 19th isn't the same Max Holloway from either of their previous encounters. This is a man who's been through hell, suffered his first knockout loss, completely reinvented his career trajectory, and captured one of the most coveted titles in the sport in spectacular fashion. More importantly, this is a Holloway who has nothing left to lose and everything to prove. But Holloway isn't just thinking about settling the score with Poirier. He's playing a much bigger game that could shake up the entire lightweight division. Just weeks before their Trilogy fight, UFC 317 will crown a new lightweight champion when Ilia Topuria faces Charles Oliveira for the vacant title. And here's the kicker. Holloway has history with both men. Topuria just knocked him out, while Oliveira represents another chapter in Holloway's lightweight journey. Holloway's strategy is brilliant in its simplicity. He knows that a dominant performance against Poirier, especially in devastating fashion, immediately puts him in the conversation for the next title shot. As he put it himself, who's to say he's not fighting for the undisputed lightweight title by the end of the year? It's a calculated gamble that could either fast-track him to championship gold or end his title aspirations entirely if Poirier completes the Trilogy sweep. This creates an impossible situation for Poirier. He's fighting in New Orleans, practically his backyard, with a crowd that will be overwhelmingly in his favor. The pressure to deliver a storybook ending is immense. Every fan, every media member, every person in that arena will be hoping to witness the perfect retirement moment. But standing across from him will be a fighter who's openly stated his intention to spoil those plans and steal the spotlight for himself. The mental warfare is already in full effect. Holloway keeps reminding everyone that while Poirier will be riding off into the sunset after this fight, he'll still be here, still hunting for that undisputed title. It's a psychological edge that could prove decisive. Poirier has to deal with the emotions of his final fight, the hometown pressure, and facing an opponent who has absolutely nothing to lose and is fighting for his career's second act. What makes this trilogy even more compelling is the timing of everything. Both fighters are coming off title fight losses. Holloway got knocked out by Topuria, while Poirier was submitted by Islam Makhachev. They're both at crossroads in their careers, but heading in completely opposite directions. One is trying to end on a high note, while the other is desperately trying to prove he still belongs at the top of the sport. The stakes couldn't be higher for either man. For Poirier, this represents his last chance to add another signature victory to his legacy and go out on his own terms in front of his home crowd. For Holloway, it's about proving that his move to lightweight wasn't just a desperate attempt to stay relevant, but a strategic decision that could lead to championship gold. The winner gets to write their preferred version of history, while the loser has to live with what could have been. When these two legends step into the octagon on July 19th, they'll be carrying the weight of over a decade of shared history, two previous battles, and completely different motivations. Poirier will be fighting for the perfect ending to a Hall of Fame career, while Holloway will be fighting to prove that his most dangerous chapters are still ahead of him. Only one vision can survive, and the MMA world will never be the same after we find out which fighter's story gets the final word in this epic trilogy.